Hello and welcome to the first video of Intelligent Automation series. In this video, we're going to see how the UiPath's Intelligent OCR activities can help us simplify the entire process of document processing. No matter how big or small a company is, they all have to spend a lot of time processing documents. And if we can successfully automate such mundane tasks, then we not only save time by eliminating manual entry and accelerating document search, but also reduce error and improve the quality of our extractions. So if you're already processing a lot of documents in your company, then you already know that it becomes even more challenging when the documents keep changing in their format. You also might know that some of the documents are easy to process because of the fixed format, for example licenses, passports and forms, but there could be other documents with varying formats like emails and contracts which are difficult to extract data from. But in between these fixed format and varying formats, we also come across some documents which have fixed as well as varying formats. For example, the purchasing orders or the invoices that the payroll department has to pay, or also the utility bills for that matter. With the UiPath's Intelligent OCR, we get a single platform to handle all such documents, wherein you can use the form-based extractor to handle documents with fixed format, and for handling unstructured documents, you can use machine learning-based extractors. So without wasting any time, let's have a look at the document processing workflow. Well, here are the bunch of steps that one needs to follow if he wants to create a workflow in order to process any kind of documents. And as you can see, the first activity is nothing but the define document taxonomy. So let me just clarify what taxonomy is. Taxonomy is nothing but it's a logical classification of various documents into different groups and categories. To clarify it even further what taxonomy means and how to classify your documents into different groups and categories, let's take an example of a typical manufacturing company. So the company itself would come at the group level, and every company could be divided into different departments, for example accounts, engineering, production and HR and many more. And each of these departments could be considered at different categories. Accounts may handle document types such as invoice, receipts, and POs, whereas engineering is mostly focused on engineering drawings or customer specifications, whereas if you go to manufacturing or the production, they mainly handle work instructions on how to manufacture a typical product, and whereas HR would be typically handling resumes from different candidates or also their passports or any other documents. So this is one typical way how you can define a taxonomy, where at group level we have the name of the enterprise, and at the category level we have different departments in that enterprise, and then each department is handling different type of documents. Soon we would see in UiPath how to define a taxonomy, so it would be much more clear to you once we see it in the UiPath Studio. And once the taxonomy would be defined, then we would be moving to the next step, which is loading the taxonomy. So there's already a UiPath activity that's called load taxonomy. And each of these activities, they come under the Intelligent OCR package. So once we are in the UiPath Studio, we would also see how to install this package. So once the taxonomy has been loaded, the next step is to digitize the document. So the most of the documents that we get could be either in a PDF format or it could be an image or any other format. And in order to make it readable by the machine, we need to convert it into a digital format. And this is done by using the digitized document activity. As an input to this activity, you are giving it the file path. And as an output, you get an extraction of the entire text, which could be written into a text file. And along with that, you also get a DOM document. The DOM is nothing but a document object model. And this DOM variable is nothing but it's creating a model of the document that you had passed. And in this model, you have different properties. For example, the kind of document that you passed, the number of pages that were there. And we'll see further in UiPath Studio directly how this DOM variable is being used. So once the document has been digitized into a readable format, the next step is to classify this document. Since we already saw under the taxonomy definition that there were different kind of documents that we defined, and it becomes very easy for the robot to handle if he already knows the kind of document that he's looking into. We'll look closer into this activity again in the UiPath Studio, and it will become much clearer for you to see how the classified document is being used. So once the document has been classified, you take out the result. So you take the classification result, and depending on the classification result, you use the extraction method. In UiPath, at present we have three kinds of extraction methods, where the regex-based method uses a regular expression to extract corresponding attributes on the document. And then we have a form-based extraction method, which is used to handle documents with fixed format. So you would have to define a typical template for each of these kind of formats. And then the third one is a machine learning based extractor, wherein an external web service would be used to identify the required fields from the document. So once the data has been extracted, the next step is to validate this data. So UiPath also offers you a present validation station, wherein you get all the fields that needs to be extracted, and it also highlights from where these particular extractions had been made. And depending on the confidence score of the extraction, you could choose which extraction to keep and which not to. And if you're not satisfied with any extraction, you could also directly indicate on the screen and change the extraction. So once the data has been extracted and validated, the next step is to export this extract and then further use it in any other application. So now that we understand the complete workflow of how the document has to be processed, let's just go into UiPath Studio and have a look at these activities one by one. So now that we're there in UiPath Studio, let's just go ahead and install all the packages that we need. And under all packages, just search for Intelligent OCR and click on install. The other activity that we need is document understanding. So we'll install that as well. And the other package that we need is the Omni page package. So this is a new package which has a bunch of OCR activities that we'll be using. Since I wanted to try this, that's why I'm using the Omni page. Just feel free to use the normal Microsoft or the Tesseract OCR. And once all these packages have been added, I'll just click on save. And this would add all the packages to your UiPath Studio instance. So once all the packages have been added, let's open our main workflow. And within this main workflow, I'll be adding all the activities that I've already shown you in the slide before. So the very first activity was load taxonomy. Let's just drag and drop it. And after loading the taxonomy, we need to digitize the document. So I'll call this activity as well. And thereafter, we need to call a classifier scope, which would be used to classify the document type. So once the document has been classified, the next step is to use the extraction activity. So we'll be using the data extraction scope. So once the data has been extracted, we need to validate the result. And for that, we have a present validation station. So just drag and drop it. And after validating it, we would be exporting the result. So there is an export activity as well. Let's drag and drop it here again. So yeah. So once all these activities have been added, so if you remember, this is exactly what I had showed you in the slide as well. And if you see, these activities are already available in the UiPath Studio also. And now let's go one by one into each of these activities and have a look how to go around them. And the very first activity is load taxonomy. But before we load a taxonomy, we need to first define a taxonomy. And in order to define the taxonomy, you need to go into the taxonomy manager here. And this would open the taxonomy manager wizard. And if you see here, a JSON file has been already been created. So after we create the taxonomy, we'll have a look at this document as well. And if you remember, we need to create a group and a category. And the group for us was the name of the enterprise. So let's just keep it as enterprise. And in the category, if you remember, we had different departments in this enterprise. And for this automation, let's just take accounts department as a category and click on the add button and add accounts. So now that we have created a group and a category, the next thing that we need to do is add a document into these categories. So accounts is normally dealing with documents such as invoices and receipts. So I'll just create a document type here as invoice. And if you see, the group and category is already there, and just click on save. And once you click on save, the entire hierarchy has been presented here. Now let's just go into invoice and define different fields. So if you see here, there's an option to add a new field. So the fields are nothing but the different attributes that you want to extract out of a document. So if you think of invoice, invoice comes majorly with information such as the name of the vendor, with some invoice number, some due amount that someone has to pay, and some kind of a date. So let's add these fields here. So if you click on this add new field, you would get this edit field window. And then here we can define the different kind of fields that we want to extract out of invoice. And for demonstration purpose, I've already downloaded some of the invoices. So let's just go and have a look at these invoices. So this one here, for example. So here on the right hand side, you see the invoice. And on the left hand side, we have the taxonomy manager visit. And I would just add a new field. And let's say the first field is the invoice number. Just ensure that the names that you're adding here in the fields should be understandable. So if someone else is also using this file, this taxonomy file, he should be easily able to understand that. So we have indicated the invoice number. And then you have to select the type of data that it is. And in our case, it's a number. So click on number and save. And then you can add another field. Let's say the vendor name. And the type is name. Save this as well. And then another field could be the date. And the type here is again date. So if you see here, the moment you selected date, there is a format option also available. You can define it, but it is optional. So I'll just leave it for now. And let's just click on save. Another information that I would be interested in is the total amount. And this type is also a number. So now I've added different kind of fields that I want out of my invoice. And namely, they are the invoice number, which is here, the vendor name, and then the due date, and also the total amount. So you could also add some other fields which you might be interested in, but for now I will just keep it to this, and let's just save it. And once it's being saved, it would directly be saved into the JSON file that you already saw. So I'll close the taxonomy manager, and if I go under my projects panel, and if I refresh my page, you will see that there is a new folder that has been added called document processing. And under document processing, you have a file called taxonomy.json. So this file was automatically created using your taxonomy manager. So let's just go and have a look at it. And if you see, there are different document types that have been created using the taxonomy manager. In our case, it was invoice. So that is the ID. And under this document type ID, we had also defined certain fields. And if you see, we have all the fields information here as well. So let's say in future, you want to further add different kind of documents. You could simply just go back into the UiPath Studio and click on Taxonomy Manager, select the relevant document type, and then you can further add a new field. And if you don't want to add a new field, instead you want to add a new document, all you need to do is just select the relevant group and the category, and then click on Add New Document. For example, let's do receipt and save. So if you see here under the hierarchy, there's a new document type that has been added. There is a typo. So that's all for the taxonomy manager. So now that we know how to create a taxonomy document, let's go back to the UiPath Studio and load this document using the load taxonomy activity. So the load taxonomy activity converts the created taxonomy file into a taxonomy variable that could be used within the workflow. So let's just create this variable and call it taxonomy. And once the taxonomy variable has been created, the next step is to use the digitized document activity in order to convert the PDF or the image files into a readable digital format. So for that, let's go inside this digitized document activity and define all the variables. So first we need to give the document path. And for this document path, I've already defined a default value. So the next is the document text, which is the text output that would be generated once this file has been converted into a digital format. So let's just give it a name and call it document text. And also, as we already saw in the presentation before, the digitized document also creates a document object model. So while we run this workflow, we'll also see exactly what is inside this document object model. So for now, let's just give the name to this variable. And as a next step, we need to drag and drop an OCR engine. So if you remember, while installing various packages, we had installed a package name called Omni Page. So we'll be using this particular OCR engine here, which is called Omni Page OCR. So the digitized document activity has been configured. Let's go back to our main workflow. And before we go to the classify document scope, let's just see what is the output that we get out of this digitized document activity. So what I'll do is I will write the text that is being generated into a text file. And for that, we'll need to call the write text file activity. Let's drag and drop it here and define the input as the document text. And we need to also give a file path name. So let's just call it demo.txt. And I will just disconnect this arrow from here and connect it to our write text file activity. So let's just go ahead and run it. And this should create a text file. So now let's go and check into our project folder if there's a new file that has been created. And if you see, a demo text has been created. And this is the text that has been extracted out of the invoice that we had passed. Let's have a look at the invoice itself. So if you see, on the right hand side we have the invoice, and on the left hand side we have the extracted text. And the first thing here is the name of the company and the address, which is 100% match. And then we also needed to extract the invoice number, which is 13759, which is here. And then we also have the date, which is June 19, 2019. It's the same thing here. And in the end, we also have the total amount, that is $879.6. And it's the same thing here. So we have been able to extract the fields that we actually wanted. And it seems that the Omni OCR is working really fine. So let's go back to our studio. And now let's configure our classify document scope. So to do that, let's just go inside it. The reason we need to classify a document is because if you remember, while defining the taxonomy, we had defined two kinds of documents. One was invoice and the other one was receipt. So if a document has to be analyzed, the robot should be in a position to able to at least identify what kind of document he has to extract data from. So with this classification, he would be able to understand if the input document is a receipt or an invoice. So let's just go ahead and define the input and the output variables. And once the input and output variables have been defined, we need to also drag and drop the classifier here. So within input, we need to first give the document path, and then the document text, and then the DOM model here. And then we need to save the classification result into a variable, which is called classification result. And also you need to give the taxonomy variable here. So once all the input and outputs have been configured, we need to go to activity and drag and drop the keyword based classifier. So the classifier that we are using here is called keyword based classifier. So what it basically does is, there are certain keywords that you need to define for each document type, and this classifier would go and look into these documents for these keywords, and if the frequency of these keywords is high, then this particular document would be classified accordingly. And in order to configure this classifier, we need to again define a JSON file. And this JSON file will consist of all the keywords associated with the document ID. Since I don't have a JSON file already, I will go and create it first. I'll just copy paste this and give it a name as keyword. Let's just make this empty first. So once you have defined the path, the next thing is we need to define the various keywords for different documents. For that, just go into Manage Learning. And as you go inside this, you would already see that there are two document types that are already in. And here you have a button which says Add New Keyword Set. So just click on this and just define different keywords that should help the classifier in order to identify the kind of document it is. So in case of invoice, one keyword could be invoice itself. So most of the invoices have this word on them. And also in case of receipt, one identification could be receipt itself. Also, in order to define other keywords, let's just open one of the invoices and the receipts. And if I open this receipt, it's a receipt from Walmart. And if we see here, there is no receipt keyword here. So the classifier would not be able to classify this particular document. And that's why for that case, let's just add Walmart as well as one of the keywords for receipts. So for that, I will just click on Add New Keyword. And in case of invoice, I think it's enough if we have just one keyword here. For now, it would work. But let's just imagine that there are other document types also inside your taxonomy. Then you would have to also define the keywords for this kind of documents. So for now, let's just save it. And the moment you save it, and if you go and have a look into your keyword.json file, the keyword should be added against different document types. So if you see the document ID here is invoice, and the keywords that's being associated with invoice are basically invoice. And similarly, in case of receipt, the keyword that is being associated is receipt as well as Walmart. So now let's just go back to our UiPath Studio. Now after the keywords have been added to the keyword.json file, let's just configure our classifier. And here if you see, there's also a parameter where you can also set the minimum confidence score. Let's just keep it to 0 for now. And here, since we want to classify both the invoice and receipt kind of documents, so I'll check them both as yes and then save it. So that's all for the classified document. Let's just go back to our main workflow. And before I configure our data extraction scope, let's just check the output of this classification activity. So for that, I will create a message box. And connect this arrow with my message box here. And in the message box, if you remember, we had created a variable called classification result, which is an array. So I will call the first item of this array. And since I'm interested in the type of document ID that comes out of it, so there are different properties. So if you just click on dot, you would get the name of the document ID. And once that's defined, let's just go back to our main workflow and run it. And in the message box, you should be able to see the kind of document that has been passed and also see the classification result. So if you see, we had passed a 2.jpg file and it has been classified as invoice. So let's just have a look at 2.jpg. And if I go back to my demo documents here, the 2.jpg was an invoice. So our classification is working fine. As a next step, I would also pass a receipt. So for that, let's just copy the path and save this into the variables here. So I've replaced the 2.jpg with 8.jpg, which is a receipt. And let's again try and run it and see if our classifier is able to identify it as a receipt. So I will just run this file And in the message box now, you should be able to see that it's a receipt. So yes, if you see here, our classifier was also able to identify this particular document as a receipt. So I'll just close this again now. Now, as we saw that our classifier is also working fine, the next step is we need to set our data extraction scope. And in order to do that, I'll just go inside this. So like in the previous activity, here also we have certain input and outputs that needs to be configured. And thereafter, we need to drag and drop certain extractors. If you remember from our previous slide, there are basically three kinds of extractors that are there in UiPath. Mainly the regular expression based, the other one is form based, and the third one is machine learning based. So let's just define all the inputs and outputs first. And if you remember, the classification result was an array. So I would pass the first item of this array. And we need to also define a variable in order to save the extraction result. And if you see, I have not defined the document type ID because I've already given in the classification result. So if the classification result has been defined in the scope, then you don't need to give the document type ID. So once that's done, let's drag and drop different extractors. As already mentioned, that there are three kinds of extractors that come with the Intelligent OCR package, and of this, regex based is very easy to configure. So I would just leave it for you all to figure it out how it works. And even though it is the simplest extractor, I would suggest you to always start document processing with this classifier, because as compared to the ML based and the form based classifiers, these are faster and free of cost. So let's just drag and drop the form based extractor. And as you drag and drop it here, you would see that the URL of the endpoint is already mentioned in the endpoint text box. All you need to mention is the API key. And in order to get the API key, you need to go to your UiPath cloud platform, which was nothing but platform.uipath.com. And once you're here, go under admin, and within licenses, there should be other services. And as you go into other services, you would see that under document processing, you already have an API key. Just copy this API key and paste it in the API key text box. So once the endpoint and the API key has been added, the next step is to create a template for different documents that you would be extracting using this extractor. So in our case, since we'll be extracting data from invoice and receipts, so just for demonstration, I will just show you how to create a template for the invoice. So just click on Create Template. And here under the document type, I'll select Invoice. And then you need to give the template name. In a lot of cases, it might happen that even though that the document type is same, you might have different formats for this document type. For example, in case of invoice, the invoice may vary depending on the vendor who is sending you the invoice. And in such case, you might have to define different templates depending on different vendors. So in our case, let's have a look at the name of the vendor, which was Sit Amet. I'll just define it here, and then you need to also select the document that you're defining the template for. So let's just go and browse for the document, which was 2.jpg. I'll just select this. And after passing the template document, we need to also define the OCR engine. Since we're already using the Omni-page OCR, I would again select this one. And if you see here, there's an option which says Force Apply OCR. This has to be checked in case of native PDF files. So even if you're having native PDF files and you don't want to extract the data in a native format, you could use the Force Apply OCR, and then the OCR engine would be activated. I would just leave it as it is and just click on Configure. And as I click on that, the digitization of the document starts and this new pop-up pops up. Here it is just giving me a description of how to use this particular template manager. I will just close this and show you how to use it. So one thing that I forgot to mention was that the form extractor is basically used whenever the format of your document is fixed. And the different fields are being identified depending on the position of that particular field on that document. So it could happen that an invoice coming from a particular vendor always has a fixed format, but in case if the invoice is coming from a different vendor and the format changes, then you would also have to define the template for that particular vendor. So let's just go ahead and define the positions for different fields that we have. And here you can already see on the left hand side that these were the fields that we had defined in the taxonomy document. But here you have the first field, which is page 1 matching info. This particular info is basically used by the robot to differentiate between different pages on a multi-page document. But since we have only one page, it is not of a major importance for us. But in case you have multiple pages in your documents, you need to select elements in such a way so that it would help the robot differentiate between different pages. So let's just indicate 5 elements in order to identify this particular page. And once that's done, just click on the plus button here. As you can see that these all elements have been added. And the next is, let's indicate the elements for the fields as well. So for that, you need to click on the selection box here. And first, let's just select for the invoice number, which is this one, and click on the custom area. And here, since it's an invoice, I will click on the plus button here. And this particular selection is then added for invoice number. Now, similarly, we will also define the area for other fields. So once you have defined all the fields, just click on the save button, and this would save your template. And if you see here, you also have an option to define different synonyms for yes and no. Since there are some documents where you have checkboxes, and since these checkboxes cannot be interpreted as text, so you have an option here to add this in this field. Since we don't have any checkboxes on our document, I will just leave it. But if you have one, just go ahead and define it here. I will just close this. So with this, the form extractor has been set up. And as a next step, I would add another extractor here as well, which is nothing but your machine learning based extractor. Just drag and drop it. And if you see here, you get a pop-up to add the endpoint for invoices. So I already have the endpoint from the UiPath's forum. I'll just paste it here. And once that's added, I need to again add the API key. And for that, we need to again go back to the UiPath platform and copy the key. And I'll again paste it back here. And then just click on the Get Capabilities. So with that, we have also set up our machine learning extractor. Now, as you can see here that we have multiple extractors within the data extraction scope. So let's just go and configure these extractors using the Configure Extractor button. And once you're here, let's just click on the invoice first. And as you can see here in the Configure Extractors window, we have already the 2 extractors that we had added in the extractor scope. So here you need to define which attributes of a particular document needs to be extracted from which extractor. And here under the machine learning extractor, you see that there is a drop-down button. And as you click on this, the different attributes that the machine learning extractor provides. So since the first attribute that we have is called invoice number, let's look if the machine learning extractor has this. And yes, we have an invoice number here. Similarly, we'll look for vendor name. And let's see if we have a vendor name here. And unfortunately, we do not have a vendor name, so I will just leave it as it is. And let's look if we have a due date. So we do have a due date here. Let's select that. And then let's check for total amount. So instead of total amount, we have a net amount, which seems to have the same meaning. So I will select the net amount as well. And since we don't have a vendor name, so I would use the form extractor to extract vendor name, and all the rest of the documents I'll use the machine learning extractor. But before I save this, I would just like to remind you that if you would have added the regex paste extractor here, you would have also seen it here as one of the columns. And like my previous suggestion, I would suggest to first use the regex paste extractor because you don't have to pay for it. And also they are faster since you're not sending any requests to an external API. So I'll just click on save. And once that's done, our data extraction scope is completely configured. And I'll go back to my main workflow here. And as a next step, now we need to set up our present validation station. So this present validation station is nothing but it's a human in a loop capability that the UiPath is offering you. So let's just configure our present validation station by double clicking on this. And let's just define all the variables here. And now we need to create a variable in order to save the validated extraction result. So like before, just click on Control K and we call it validated extraction result. Now we need to export this validated result into data table. For that, let's just go back to the main workflow, and in the export extraction results, we need to add the validated variable here, which is nothing but validated extraction result. And then we need to create a variable called dataset. The reason we cannot directly use the validated extraction result because this particular variable consists of a lot of information. So it's not just the extracted fields that you wanted to extract from the document, but along with that, you also get various attributes from the document object model. For example, the number of pages, or also the size of the document, or the type of the document. But since we are not interested in all these information, we would just be using this export extraction result to extract the data tables out of this validated extraction result. But dataset is nothing but a set of all the data tables. And in order to view what is inside this data table, we'll use a for each loop and print it using a message box. So let's just go back to our main workflow and we'll look for a for each loop. Let's just drag and drop it here. And inside this, we'll pass the dataset that we just created. Since we want the tables out of this dataset, let's just call that attribute. And here as well, we'll change the type argument to data table. And once that's done, let's use the output data table activity to convert the data table into a string. And here the input would be our table. And now using a message box, we'll print this data table. So now that's done, let's go back to our main workflow and let's run it. And right now it's going under the Digitized Document activity, and now it's in the data extraction scope. And now here we have a validation station. So if you see here, all the fields have been extracted with 100% confidence score, and it's only for the document type that we have a confidence score of 44%. But that's not a problem. Let's validate each of these values and save it. And as you save it, you see there is a message box with all the fields that we wanted to extract. So now in order to check if this workflow works also for other invoices, let's just change the default value of the document path that we had been passing. And in this case, we would be passing 3.jpg. So let's just copy the path here. And now copy the path name here. So we have replaced it from 2.jpg to 3.jpg. Now let's just see if we are still able to extract the data or not. So we'll just run this file. And similarly, like in the previous case, we'll be going through different workflows, the data extraction, and now in the present validation station. And if you see, the confidence score has reduced from 100 to somewhere around 96%. And for the total amount, it is 79%. But still, the value are correct. And let's just validate them and click on save. Now, as we saw that the extraction works pretty fine also for the other documents. And if you want to check if all the documents are working fine with this particular workflow or not, we would just have to move all these activities into a for loop. But I would leave that on to you. And in case if you want to have a closer look into this complete workflow, I would be uploading this into the Git repository. So the link would be available in the description below. Just go ahead and have a look at it. So in the next video, we'll be using the concept of Intelligent OCR that we learned today to solve the fourth RPA challenge, which is nothing but invoice extraction. Well, that's all for the document understanding. I hope this video is going to help you reach your automation goals. So if you like this video, then hit on the like button and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for other content. So see you again in the next video. Till then, keep automating.